Well, thank you very much. We have quite the double header this morning. Having heard from Prime Minister Mitsotakis, we're now delighted that the US ambassador to the UN, Michael Waltz, former National Security Advisor, has been able to join us for a few minutes. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Oh, thank you. Great to be with you. Good morning. And I hope you can hear me okay across the ocean.
We can, loud and clear. I think I should start with congratulations. This is not an administration that has sought to run a lot of its foreign policy through the United Nations, but you did seek and obtain a UN Security Council resolution supporting the Gaza peace deal this week. Can you just tell us a little bit about why you wanted the UN's backing for this and the concrete next steps you're looking for from here?
Well, yeah, thank you. It was quite a vote. I think history will look back on it as one of the most consequential votes the United Nations has taken in quite some time. And essentially, what it did was endorse and welcome the Board of Peace, chaired by the United States. And underneath that, you will have essentially an international fund largely managed by the World Bank, to which countries can contribute for the reconstruction, rebuilding, even supporting the stabilization of Gaza. So that's one. Number two, there will be a technocratic administration of Palestinians, apolitical, largely overseen by the board. But these will be technocrats responsible for electricity, sewage, water, really getting basic government services back in place. And then importantly, and to answer your question most directly, many countries wanted and needed the UN's blessing to send troops in for the stabilization of Gaza. Countries that we're having quite positive conversations with, like Azerbaijan, Indonesia, and others. And all of this stemmed from the historic gathering that we had at Sharm el-Sheikh, which led to the ceasefire in Gaza so many had been crying for so long, and also the release of the hostages. We still have 3 remains that are being brutally held and used as negotiating chips by the terrorist group Hamas. But, again, we've had 2 years of devastating war. And our argument to the United Nations was, everyone can find flaws in this plan, I'm sure, but it's either this moving forward or a return to war between Israel and Gaza and Hamas, and certainly no one wants that.
And you highlighted the importance of the International Stabilization Force. I mean, no country has publicly agreed to join it yet. Several have ruled out joining. I just wonder, how are you expecting that to move forward? Are there other countries apart from Azerbaijan who's not, I don't think, has formally said they'll join? What others are you hoping will join?
In fairness, we passed the resolution this week, and a number of those countries need, both for their domestic laws or their constitutions or otherwise, wanted the stamp, so to speak, of the UN and the blessing of the Security Council. Many said that would navigating between the Arabs, the Palestinians, the Israelis, and avoiding a veto from China or Russia was impossible. This administration's been told peace was impossible before, and yet we are now weeks, if not months, into a ceasefire that many had clamored for a long time. So enough with the symbolism, frankly. We've seen a lot of symbolism out of a number of international organizations. This is a real plan. We have 200 American troops on the ground facilitating aid. We're back to over 600 trucks a day that are moving in to Gaza. So far, it's fragile, it's difficult. The ceasefire is holding, and hostages walked out alive. And on top of that, we're receiving the remains literally week by week. So no one said this was going to be easy, but I think we've seen progress that should be celebrated.
Do you, just on that point, and it's obviously very difficult, over 33 people died in Israeli strikes overnight in Gaza. We've obviously had an intensification of settler violence. Did we lose it? Have we lost the ambassador? That would be bad. I was just getting onto, the nitty gritty. Should we see if we're... There? I don't think we're going to... How's it looking? Have we been able to get... He was coming through so well till I mentioned anybody dying. I don't know. I think we might have to... I think we might have to move on. I don't know whether...
Hello?
Oh, he's back. Hello.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. So we were just talking about... Did I lose you again? No.
No.
We're losing you from the screen, so I can't tell whether you can still hear me. I mean, we've had Israeli strikes in Gaza overnight. We've had intensification of settler violence in the West Bank, and Israel also killed 13 people in a drone attack in Lebanon in recent days. I mean, as you said, no one was expecting this to be easy, but is the administration disappointed with the amount of violence we're seeing, not just in Gaza, but involving Israel in other parts of the region?
Well, I have to push back on the premise of the question a bit, because if we continue to lay out the violence, what we've tragically seen is Hamas literally lining up its opponents on camera and executing them with guns to the back of the head. So the entity that's killing the most Palestinians in the most brutal fashion, very deliberately to send a message as it reestablishes control, is Hamas. And I would hope that that would be first and foremost on anyone's mind. Absolutely. And I believe Secretary Rubio spoke out about the violence in the West Bank. We absolutely will address that with the Israeli government to the best we can. But what we cannot return to is the definition of insanity, which is to try to rebuild, allow Hamas to survive, and have it attack Israel and start this insanity all over again. So we are trying to break that cycle of violence. We are trying to do things a bit differently than what has been done in the past. And again, I'm sure there's a lot of room for commentary, but I do praise the administration for stepping in, achieving the ceasefire, having so many Arab and Muslim majority nations on board, by the way, who publicly supported this UN Security Council resolution, as did the Palestinian Authority. So not perfect, but let's not let perfect be the enemy of moving forward.
There's a lot of interest in the room and obviously in the region about US relations with China and the recent rapprochement on the trade front a few weeks ago. It was called, I spoke to the Singaporean foreign minister at the beginning of this event. He called it a tactical pause. We are still looking at Bloomberg. We're very focused on the details of some of these sort of crucial elements like the licenses for rare earth exports. Are you confident that those details are going to be worked out?
I am. I'm certainly confident in Secretary Besson, our Treasury Secretary, Ambassador Greer, our trade representative. You know, I was listening to your prior panel with the Prime Minister of Greece, and look, you know, one of the things that I think we'll look back on COVID was that seemingly small things that you can no longer manufacture at home, like mask gowns and gloves, can very quickly become a critical national security issue when you need them. The other thing that we have seen China now weaponize is both mining and refining to rare earths. We saw them do it to some extent to Japan. We've seen them do it to some extent to our friends in Australia, but now it has been fully weaponized. The United States is working diligently to onshore or ally shore access to those things that make our economy go. And from a multilateral space, you have these organizations like the International Civil Aviation Organization that sets standards for how we fly around the world, the International Seabed Agency that's looking at seabed mining and controlling international waters, the laying of cables. that control 90% of financial data. And most recently, the International Maritime Organization that sought to levy the world's first carbon tax on our global shipping fleet to the tune of $1 billion a month that would have been passed on to consumers. So I think we all have a real interest in these organizations that many people have never heard of. The International Telecommunications Union, Spectrum, Space, and Radio, that we want set in line with our values, with free markets and open societies. But this is a real struggle that's happening behind the scenes. And this administration has given me instructions and our team instructions to get in there and fight for our interests.
You talk about, I mean, that has been one of the distinguishing features of the Trump administration in the first Trump administration as well, wanting to reduce the US economy's dependence on China. I think that was why some people were surprised coming out of that recent deal with China that China was actually coming out with a relatively better position in terms of US tariffs and other obstacles than a lot of the sort of key trading partners that might have expected they were going to be able to do better in trading to the US, and the US wanting to diversify. So I just wonder, I mean, do you consider that to be just a short-term situation, because people here are obviously trying to plan their supply chains?
Well, I certainly don't want to get ahead of the negotiations, and I won't get ahead of our Treasury Secretary, but I can tell you the president is keenly focused. We can be friends and allies and share values, but at the same time, when there are long historic tariffs on the other side or non-tariff trade barriers, that's something we absolutely have to address for our economy, for our industry, and for our national security. And we'll have some tough conversations. But at the end of the day, I think we'll get to a good place.
The other thing that we thought we understood about this administration, because they pioneered having national security-based controls on advanced semiconductors and other technology vis-a-vis China. Again, in the first Trump administration, that was continued under the Biden administration. Again, there seems to be lots more flexibility on that. The deals that the president did with NVIDIA, giving in principle support for sales to China of certain chips. Some question mark about whether NVIDIA will be allowed to sell the very advanced Blackwell chips. I just wonder, again, can you just clarify for us, are we, as the US, still looking to limit those kind of sales, or is it all up for grabs?
Well, I think those will be ongoing conversations. But I have to tell you, to my knowledge, and I hope I don't get this wrong, the most advanced chips, the Blackwells, are absolutely focused on our national security needs. I do not believe that those are being exported. But again, I do not want to get ahead of both our Commerce Department and our trade reps.
You're sitting in the UN, and you have told me that, your office has told me you don't want to engage heavily on the issue of Venezuela, and I understand that people don't want to get in front of the administration. But there is an idea of President Maduro being offered a safe exit plan that's being discussed by a number of countries, and the UN is the kind of place where you would have these back-channel conversations. I just wonder, would the US countenance that kind of scenario for Maduro?
Well, if we were having back channel conversations, I certainly wouldn't make them front channel in this forum.
Just among friends.
But we've been very clear that we see the trafficking of people, of drugs, of weapons, of fentanyl in particular, backed by state actors. And by what we consider the head of an international criminal organization, Maduro, to be absolutely unacceptable. It is in our national security interests, and we're going to take decisive action. You even recently saw regional actors like Colombian President Petro suggesting it may be time for Maduro to go. And you do have an internationally verified stolen election. And now a Nobel Peace Prize winning Maria Corina, who is fighting just what I think history will look back on as a truly noble fight for their freedom.
I mean, you are referring to those international authorities in citing support for the approach to Venezuela. But of course, on the other side, we've had in the UN a panel of experts and others condemning the extraterritorial targeting of vessels by the US, some in the UN talking about the US behaving as a rogue nation, even as they criticize Venezuela. Are you worried that there will be some form of UN vote or UN censure of the US for those? Do you see that weakening the US position?
Well, we could probably spend the rest of the evening talking about ridiculous conversations in the UN. Countries like Iran and Venezuela on the Human Rights Council opining on human rights in Europe and the United States. But without getting too far in the weeds, Article 51 of the UN Charter also authorizes a country to take decisive action in its own self-defense. Look, we've lost more people to fentanyl in the last year than we lost in the 10 years of the conflict in Vietnam. This is being done deliberately. It's being done, it's state supported, and it's destabilizing not only our country, but the region. And we're seeing these cartels, for example, work with the gangs that have taken over all of Haiti, that are transshipping on to Western Africa, to Europe and the United States. So as another UN Security Council resolution that we just passed will establish a gang suppression force. Right now, Kenya is there, but it'll be backed by others. These transnational gangs are not the mafia. They are, change the name from Sinaloa to ISIS, and you have a very different dynamic. So I remember my background is in special operations. We were running around the world in the 90s trying to arrest Osama bin Laden as a criminal matter. Once 9/11 occurred, we changed that national security dynamic, and that's what you're seeing, the approach you're seeing the administration take with these transnational terrorist groups that have been designated as terrorist groups in Venezuela and in Mexico.
Just we're going to run out of time, but we did lose a bit of time at the beginning. You heard Prime Minister Mitsotakis talking briefly about the Ukraine, the 22-point plan that is currently being discussed for Ukraine, and you know how many people are viewing that as quite heavily leaning in favor of Russia. But it comes at a time when President Zelensky is under a lot of pressure over the corruption scandals currently hitting his chief of staff. I'm just interested, as far as the US is concerned, do you feel that the exit of his chief of staff, Yermak, who now has so much pressure on him, is something that you would need to see to move forward in negotiations as part of your anti-corruption efforts?
Oh, God, I'm not going to comment on speculation out in the press, but in terms of the premise of your question, I mean, we literally just had, I believe it was October 22nd, sanctions on Russia's #1 and #2 producers, Rosneft and Lukoil, that take effect tomorrow. The president has been quite decisive, but he's also been very clear that the war needs to end. We are talking millions of casualties, billions in treasure, and there is no military solution to this war on either side. It does need to come to a diplomatic solution, and we are pressing both sides to come to the table and negotiate a just and lasting and secure peace.
But when will how do you see that negotiation proceeding? Because I think most people, certainly Prime Minister Mitsotakis and others in Europe would say Ukraine has to be at the table in these negotiations, and there's no sign of Russia and Ukraine being at the table.
No, on the contrary, those sanctions went into place when President Putin refused to live up to his commitment to have a bilateral and trilateral meeting with both sides. Ukraine has absolutely been consulted. I've, in my prior position, personally consulted them. I saw the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations today, in fact. So, again, I'm not going to speculate on a lot of the media reporting out there, but what is incontrovertible is that we have increased the sanctions on the Russian economy. We've called on many European nations that unbelievably are still buying Russian oil and gas through the Ghost Fleet. We're going to continue to pressure both sides to drive this war to an end.
Ambassador Waltz, we have to go, but I must ask you a question because it's something that hangs in the room in lots of conversations, and especially when we see so many foreign leaders come to see the president. There is a perception, apparently a very widespread perception among countries and people who are going to the White House, that increasingly opulent gifts for the president, bars of gold, and supporting business deals in your country with the Trump organization is going to help you in achieving your trade or your security objectives with the US. Is that something that you're telling people in the UN is not true? Because people do seem to believe it makes a difference.
Any responsible leader will drive foreign investment into their country. And the fact that we're seeing not billions, but trillions now drive into our tech sector, into our infrastructure, I think is what the American people would expect of any president. And I have to tell you, ask the Armenians and Azerbaijan. I just talked to a Kazakh ambassador who said the first ever Kazakh wheat is going to transit Azerbaijan into Armenia because of that peace deal. Let's talk to the families of the hostages that just walked out of the tunnels of Gaza. I could keep going. We just negotiated the beginning of meaningful negotiations for Western Sahara and Morocco. The president just pledged to really try to bring an end the worst humanitarian crisis the world is seeing right now that's ongoing in Sudan. He doesn't have to take these on, but he chooses to take these on because that's under the banner of American leadership, and we'll continue to do so. So, frankly, we'll hear a lot of carping, but we're going to continue to put results on the table.
Ambassador Waltz, thank you so much for joining us.